New York Administrative Law Legal Research. The goal of this clip is to give you a brief overview of where to find relevant documents when researching New York State administrative law. For a more in-depth look, sources are provided at the end of the presentation, along with helpful websites. Like federal administrative law, New York administrative law is issued from the state's executive branch of government. The executive branch is headed by the governor, but there are several departments, independent agencies, commissions, and task forces who coordinate policies and activities for a specific concern. The scope of the power of these agencies, which may include promulgating regulations to carry out functions not administered by the legislature, is defined by enabling statutes. In this presentation, we will cover administrative rules, administrative decisions, and attorney general opinions, and executive orders. The agency's power is quasi-legislative in its rulemaking capacity and quasi-judicial in its administrative adjudication capacity. Let's start with rulemaking. The rulemaking process of executive departments and administrative agencies is governed by the State Administrative Procedure Act, or the SAPA. Briefly, the rulemaking process goes like this. Various departments, like the Department of Education, for example, must submit a regulatory agenda. The agenda describes what is being considered for rulemaking, and it provides the contact person at the agency. This is important because it gives public notice of potentially upcoming rulemaking activity. This regulatory agenda is published in the State Register, which is a weekly SAPA mandated publication. Early on in the process, a proposed rule is first reviewed by the Governor's Office of Regulatory Reform, or the GORR. Then, the agency files the proposed rule with the Secretary of State and other required entities. A notice of proposed rulemaking is also published in the State Register, but there's a catch. Remember the 2,000-word rule. Publication of full text is only required if the rule is less than 2,000 words. Even then, the agency may have the discretion to publish a summary containing the subject, purpose, and substance of the proposed rule. To obtain the full text, use the contact information of the agency representative provided on the notice of proposed rulemaking. After a comment period, the agency may adopt, revise, or even withdraw the rule. Now, the final rule is filed with the Secretary of State, and a notice of adoption is published in the State Register as required by the SAPA. Now, thus far, all stages of rulemaking process are published in the State Register, and the New York State Register is a weekly publication of the New York State Division of Administrative Rules. Now, it began in 1979 to replace the New York State Bulletin. Now, you'll find the State Register at Hofstra Law Library and on subscription databases, as well as free online. Here are a few places where you'll find it: at Axon Library, the New York State Legal Research Library, the New York State Department of State website, Lexis Advance, Westlaw Next, Bloomberg Law, the New York State Library, and New York State Library Digital Collection. Here, the State Register is accessed online from the Department of State website. Now, rules become legally effective when a certified copy of the rule is filed with the Secretary of State and the notice of adoption is published in the State Register. After it is published in the State Register, now eventually the rule is published in the official compilation of codes, rules, and regulations, better known as the NYCRR. Now, the official compilation of codes, rules, and regulations is New York's equivalent to the Code of Federal Regulations, or the CFR, and it contains the full text of the state's current regulations. An unofficial version of the NYCRR is available online from the Department of State's website. The NYCRR is grouped into 23 titles. Now, the 23 titles include one for each state department, one for miscellaneous agencies, and one for the judiciary. Now, in print, the NYCRR is an 86-volume set in loose leaf format. It contains codes, rules, regulations, and official forms. Now, it also includes annotation. Now, this is an important research tool, and it's located in the back of the binder. Now, this editorial enhancement from the publisher contains summaries of court cases and administrative opinions, orders, and decisions. Now, here are some benefits of the NYCRR and where you might find them: at Hofstra Law Library, at Lexis Advance, Westlaw Next, Bloomberg Law, New York Department of State website, as we saw earlier, and the New York State Library. So, when researching rulemaking in New York, remember, check the New York State Register. Now, as we mentioned, it is an SAPA mandated weekly publication and reports all notices of proposed rulemaking. But remember the 2,000-word rule. And there's published notices of adoptions and the text of the final rule. It reports actions and its pending index. And it's a tool to research the purpose and intent of the rule. And it also provides agency contact information for the proposed rule. Go to your NYCRR for the full text of the current regulations, but be aware of the time delay because it is a loose leaf publication. But it does contain valuable annotations and historical notes with sections filed by the Secretary of State. And finally, don't forget newspapers, because newspapers may give you that background information on rulemaking. Why was it proposed? When it came up, before that initial notice was filed. So check the time period near or about the notice of rulemaking date. Next, we're going to cover administrative decisions, opinions, and rulings. Now, agencies also maintain a quasi-judicial role derived from statutes that govern the agency. Administrative decisions, opinions, and rulings are not necessarily easy to find, and it can be complicated. Decisions may be published, but the titles of the agency publications or the name and responsibility of the agencies frequently change. And also, because of how an agency may organize or archive their documents, the information a researcher may need may vary by agency when looking for decisions. So, when looking for decisions, remember that you must contact the agency, check Lexis, Westlaw, Next, Bloomberg, and check agency listings provided by the Department of State, because they may include links to the websites of state agencies and departments. Here's an example. The agency's listing provided by the Department of State, as I mentioned, includes links to the websites of state agencies and departments. Now, some of the agencies have posted their selective decisions, opinions, and rulings on their sites, and here's a list that would take you to their website, but this list is not exhaustive. Here's an example of decisions from the New York State Education Department's website. Now, Attorney General opinions are a bit easier. When researching Attorney General opinions, remember that there are formal and informal opinions. Formal opinions are issued to state agencies upon the request of state agency officials and are considered binding. Now, in contrast, informal opinions are requested by local municipalities. Now, they're informal and considered only persuasive authority because while the state attorney general is the state's chief legal officer and is responsible for the prosecution of all actions for or against the state and has control of legal affairs of state officers and departments, the attorney general is not the chief legal officer for local government. So check the attorney general's website. Now here, the attorney general's opinions are found from 1995 through 2015. And if you're looking for sources to find attorney general opinions and agency decisions, opinions, and rulings, check Lexis Advance, Westlaw Next, New York State agencies, and the New York State Library for decisions, opinions, and rulings. And for attorney general opinions, LLMC Digital, it's an electronic resource located at Hofstra, Law Library, Lexis Advance, Westlaw Next, Bloomberg, the Attorney General website, and Hein Online. Next, let's look at executive orders. Executive orders are issued by the governor to direct or instruct the actions of executive agencies or government officials. Executive orders issued since 1960 are published in the State Register and are culminated in NYCRR Title IX. Executive orders issued before 1960 are included in compilations of the public papers of the governors. Here's an example of Title IX, subsection A, Chapter 1 of the NYCRR executive orders. And it begins with Part 1 with executive orders from Nelson Rockefeller through Part 8, which includes executive orders of Andrew M. Cuomo. Now, where do you find executive orders? The New York Governor's website, Lexis Advance, Westlaw Next, Bloomberg Law, NYCRR, the State Register, the New York State Library for those items prior to 1960, They hold the public papers of the governor, as does the State University of New York at Buffalo and the New York Public Library, Science, Industry, and Business Library. Now, here are some helpful websites mentioned throughout the presentation that would help you with New York State administrative law legal research. And finally, for a more in-depth look at researching New York administrative law, check these invaluable sources. And my thanks go to the authors of these sources. I certainly hope this helps.